suppose just a bit of background on who I am and the organisation I've been organising with since 2006. Dessie Donnelly, as it says on the slide, Participation in Practice of Rights was formed in 2006 by a woman called Inez McCormick. She was the first female president of the Irish Congress of Trade Unions, a feminist organiser, a labour organiser, human rights organiser, a key figure in the Good Friday Agreement that ended the war in the north of Ireland, and brought about the peace agreement that was actually seminal in creating PPR in the first place. And PPR was really founded due to the failings of those equalities and human rights provisions in our agreements to bring change to the most marginalised in our community. And so the idea was, what if we had an organisation or a movement that looked at bringing these tools of rights to the people who needed them most so that they could use them as effective tools for change in organising. And we set about trying to do that. From 2006, what we do currently, we organise with asylum seekers, we organise with Irish travellers, with people who are unemployed, with people who are subject to the cruelty of our welfare reform and social security changes. We work with young people who still are subjected to academic selection in Northern Ireland. And what I want to do right now is just very, very briefly, just to drop a few things that we can maybe pick up in the conversation afterwards, but some of the reflections that we look at in our organising to assess how we're doing and if we're achieving progress. The first thing I'd like to look at is really how we're organising and building movements. And this is kind of the context that we're organising, and everybody in this room will be working in separate contexts, and some of them will be similar, but some of them have different cultural outworkings. But the one thing that we start off with, and it's our working premise whenever we're working with any groups, is inequality and marginalisation are not accidents. They're deliberate and intended outcomes of social and economic policy. They happen because people and the people that we support and organise, their voices are not prioritised, their voices are sidelined when decisions are made about how the state allocates resources, how it exercises its powers, how it develops policies. But once you see that, you start to realise right away that the problem here is not something to tinker with in the system in terms of how the system distributes benefits, but actually it's much deeper than that. And we have a deep-rooted democratic problem in our society when people are deliberately marginalised from key decision-making processes. And the antidote to that is not to have them engage with processes more effectively or build trust in institutions that have let them down decade after decade, but it's to build power. And it's also to make sure that their voices, they're given the space to develop their own agenda, and that organizations like that we work for adopt an approach of humility and service when working with them, that the only agenda that PPR has when we work with these organizations is that we use whatever capacity and expertise we have, whether it be organizing, whether it be policy, whether it be technological expertise that we have, to help them develop an agenda and support that agenda as well. That's the outworkings of that is basically whenever we develop a campaign, we'll often get calls from the permanent secretary or the government minister saying, I've seen your campaign, there has been communications with us, would you meet with us? And we say, no, you meet with a group, you don't meet with us. PPR does not engage in advocacy work or representational work. It's strictly mandated to encourage participation and rights-based participation so that you're creating a culture across civic society of marginalised groups able to hold the state to account for various failings. The second issue is around how then that works out in terms of engaging with power. Once you kind of look at the problem as being one of democracy, that has really critical kind of implications for what tactics and strategies that you're using. Everyone in this room, if you're a community development practitioner, organizer, you're working in communities, you'll be inundated with consultation processes. Yesterday we talked about participation networks. You have planning processes in terms of where things. We have found that the most disingenuous thing that you could do with a group of people who are extremely marginalized is build faith in processes that have failed them for years and years and years. And there's nothing written anywhere that says to exercise your right, you must have to engage in the department's consultation process. 2 minutes, God, okay. So, what to do about that? One thing is to realize that the tactics that we're using to challenge injustice and the denial of rights must be proportionate to the scale of the problems that we're facing. Right? If you look at climate breakdown, you look at the spiraling global inequality that's happening right now, it's movements like Extinction Rebellion, it's movements like the school strike that's happening right now that are the only ones that I can see really globally catching the notion that we need to escalate massively. This notion of tinkering around the edges of engaging with government departments on policy changes here might be a worthwhile thing to do sometime, but to crack it, we need to really up our actions and our tactics. And organizations need to figure out how to do that responsibly, because it also carries implications. When we work for, we don't take any public funding to avoid the perception of being compromised. But a lot of groups that we do work with do take public money, and they will undoubtedly, without fail, get a call from the department and their funding will be threatened, or there will be other measures of control used against them. We've experienced that time and time again, and that's just a simple reality of it. A third issue, which we talked about actually, was in the discussion yesterday at the talk, was how are we assessing progress? And one of the other principles that we work with when we're organizing groups is we always go to where they are at. So the change that you're seeking needs to be able of alleviating very cruel conditions people experience in the here and now, but that must be linked to broader structural issues about why these are happening in the first place. I'll share one anecdote around this as well. But we have housing, religious inequality in housing has been a problem in the north of Ireland since the inception of the state. It was one of the causal factors behind the war happening in the north, and it still persists to this day. The UN have intervened numerous times to call on the British government and the Northern Ireland Executive to address it. Lo and behold, they haven't addressed it. But we went through a process of DUP minister, a housing minister in the north called Nelson McCausland. Everyone will be aware of the DUP who are currently propping up the Tory party in Westminster. But he decided that there was no religious inequality whatsoever, despite the statistics outlined by his own public authority. But he made public pronouncements, there is no such thing as religious equality and inequality against the Catholic community in Northern Ireland. We had, countless numbers of people coming to us who were homeless, experiencing extremely poor housing, who were concentrated in areas that, of course, were traditionally Catholic areas, experiencing the problem. So we worked with the barrister. The barrister drafted us a pre-action letter, and everyone coming through the door with a problem in terms of their housing sent that pre-action letter to the minister. So he ended up receiving hundreds of letters saying, there is no religious inequality, I'm religious inequality, and it laid out that if he didn't act around it, then he could be facing measures in the court. And lo and behold, all of these people started to get housing. So what we did was we were able to solve their individual issues, but also there was a deeper structural issue, and we used that to build popularity, engage the UN, engage cross-party political support to get this as well. But there has to be a way to develop tactics that tackle the here and the now issue, but the deeper structural things. Very lastly, on this, I think it's something that comes out of this today, but it's how do we grow? And really reconceptualizing the issue of grow, that this is not a case of trying to organizational growth. It's not about colonizing, it's not about getting bigger and fatter as an organization, but it's about the sharing of ideas, much more about the sharing of ideas. When I look at the activities and the actions that are happening in Brazil right now, there's something about me that just wants to go there and wants to find out exactly what's happening, how they're doing it, how they're merging the accountability-based organizing with the prefigurative models of institution building, how that's happening. And I think a lot of us are here in the room would want to do that, but then there's an onus here that we have relative privilege in our society. So when we go to these communities, or when communities come to us, what are you doing when you walk away from that? How are you using the power of your institution, whether it be a university, whether it be business, whether it be a school, whether it be a trade union, how are you then acting in solidarity to help the place that you just went to as well? And that's, we experience a lot, and it's quite frustrating a lot when you get a lot of people visiting you all the time. Your work is class, you never hear from them again, But that needs to change. The dynamic needs to change a lot better. And I'm going to leave it there. I've got a lot more to say, but I'm going to go.